That is the time for fear, my little lord, when the white walkers move through the woods. Thousands of years ago, there came a night that lasted a generation. Kings froze to death in their castles, same as the shepherds in their huts. And women smothered their babies rather than see them starve, and wept and felt the tears freeze on their cheeks. So is this the sort of story that you like? In that darkness, the white walkers came for the first time. They swept through cities and kingdoms, riding their dead horses, hunting with their packs of pale spiders, big as hounds.
The year is roughly 8000 BC, and the first men in Westeros have a problem. They have begun to be attacked by an enemy they have previously not encountered, and it's not just the cold of a winter lasting a generation, but with the winter has come an army of icemen that have mysterious powers and can raise the dead. But who are these others, and what do they want? Those are the first questions I set out to answer in early 2016 in what was only the second theory video I created for this channel. Despite being recorded on an old headset with exceptionally low production quality, this video is easily my most watched video on this channel, now closing in on 250,000 views, and in case you haven't seen it yet, I'll leave a link to it in the description below, as it represents a fairly comprehensive summary of my view on the others, and I still mostly agree with the thoughts I laid out in that video. Mostly. Wait, I already used that cutaway in this series. Let's see here. Dun, dun, dun. There we go. Also in the description are links to videos by David Lightbringer. He is easily the most prolific content creator that I have seen covering this topic, so much so that I can't really say for sure that the links I'm providing are comprehensive as far as his coverage of the others, but in my view, they're very well worth listening to and just might factor into what I'm about to theorize here. So in my first theory video of the others, I put forward the idea that they were dead spirits, and of course inherently tied to weirwoods, and that certain spirits became restless, wanting to escape the weirwoods to become individuals again, and created new bodies of ice in order to accomplish this. A month or two after I posted this theory, Game of Thrones released an episode showing their own version of the others' origin story, essentially that they were created by the children as agents of vengeance against the first men. At about that time, I got several comments in my theory video along the lines of, well, I guess Game of Thrones just blew apart your theory. And I can understand why D&D may have decided to go this route, because it makes for a very straightforward story, which both saves valuable screen time for other parts of the story and likely has greater appeal to a broader audience. It's essentially a quick take on George R. R. Martin's Guardian story from the Tough Voyaging series, so you can argue that there is precedent for this in his prior works. As I've been laying out throughout this theory series, the philosophy of the Children of the Forest is centered around weirwood worship, and as a hive mind, weirwoods operate in a symbiotic relationship with the individuals around them by offering them the opportunity to feel eternal love, happiness, and unity. Their viewpoint is fundamentally different from the perspective that gives rise to things like conquest or revenge. And here's the thing, according to the lore of the Age of Heroes, it worked. The first men had stopped fighting the children, and had begun worshipping the weirwoods. By the supposed time of the Long Night, the first men and the children had been at peace for some 2,000 years. So this wasn't a hive mind in the middle of a war like the Mudpots from Guardians. Peace had been established for centuries, and the weirwoods had a new population of individuals to attract to its hive mind. Everyone had won. Almost everyone. There is one major factor to consider here that hasn't been addressed yet. Prior to the Pact, the war between the children and the first men resulted in the destruction of many weirwood trees, which means that unknown numbers of souls who had previously passed into the weirwoods were now suddenly disconnected from the hive mind. They were no longer connected to the feelings of eternal love, joy, peace, and understanding. There was nothing left for them but to wait for their tree to rot and become nothing. For the souls trapped in these weirwoods, and for the children of the forest who had worshipped them, this must have been the manifestation of the greatest horror imaginable. In fact, in my mind, this is the reason why the children went to war in the first place. If one of the children happens to die, they know their consciousness can pass into the weirwood, which is ultimately what they're after anyways. So the death of individuals does not matter particularly much in the grand scheme of things. But the death of weirwoods is the shattering of not just their entire way of existence, but the existence of the ancestors who entered the weirwoods before them, and the existence of anyone they hoped might come after them. Fortunately for everyone involved, a peace was reached before the annihilation happened, or at least so everyone thought. Still unaddressed is the issue of the weirwoods that had been cut down during the years of conflict, and the souls trapped inside of them, now existing in the torture of knowing the harmonious bliss of what had preceded them, while also knowing it was now gone and they could never have it back. We don't know, and likely never will know, the exact process of creating a weirwood seed, but I'm betting that the process takes time, likely years, so it is doubtful that enough new weirwoods could be regrown to replace the fallen. And we don't even know if the rules of George R. R. Martin's world would allow the transition of consciousness from a dead weirwood to a new one anyway. So there's nothing anyone can do to save the souls trapped in the dead weirwoods waiting to die. Unless someone could create new bodies for them. And here I'll read an excerpt from Guardians. Listen along and see if you can pick out any key words that play a role in A Song of Ice and Fire. For millennia beyond counting, they have dwelled in tranquility and peace beneath the seas of this world. They are a slow, thoughtful, philosophic race, and they lived side by side in the billions, each linked with all the others, each an individual and each a part of the great racial whole. In a sense, they were deathless, for all shared experiences of each, and the death of one was nothing. Experiences were few in the unchanging sea, however. For the most part, their long lives are given over to abstract thought, to philosophy, to strange green dreams that neither you or I can truly comprehend. They are silent musicians, one might say. Together they have woven great symphonies of dreams, and those songs go on and on. Before humanity came to Namor, they had had no real enemies for millions of years. Yet that had not always been the case. In the primordial beginnings of this wet world, the oceans teemed with creatures who relished the taste of the dreamers as much as you do. Even then, the race understood genetics, understood evolution. With their vast web of interwoven minds, they were able to manipulate the very stuff of life itself more skillfully than any genetic engineers. And so they evolved their guardians, formidable predators with a biological imperative to protect those you call mudpots. And I do believe, as I said in my initial video, that the bodies of the others are engineered by either the weirwood souls or by the children, or some combination thereof. And I believe that this engineering process involves the use of human bodies, and not just because this is depicted in the show. In fact, in my initial theory video, I pointed to the story of the Night's King, a human man who bred with a female other, and previously in this video series, I pointed out that the blood of the others has likely passed into the Stark genetic line. In order for all this to happen, the others have to be a hominid species, just like the children, just like Neanderthals and Denisovans, and just like humans. Now, having answered who I think the others are, let's start tackling the question of what the others want. I think the initial argument that could be made is the desire for vengeance. But having said that, the attentive listener might point out that the pact was made around 10,000 BC, and the others didn't begin to invade Westeros until around 8,000 BC. So if they wanted vengeance, they were willing to wait 2 millennia to pursue it. Certainly, of anyone in this story, the others believe revenge is a dish best served cold. But let me make a point here. If we are using the mudpots from Guardians as our proxy for this story, then it appears that the process is an evolutionary one, coupled with the application of genetic engineering. In our world, 2 millennia is almost nothing on the evolutionary timescale. And even if we bring the concept of genetic engineering into the mix, we have to anticipate that the process would still take many, many generations to accomplish, along with no small amount of trial and error. So 2,000 years sounds like something very much on the short end of what would be required to create an army of others, set to mete out righteous retribution on the unsuspecting first men. And it fits pretty well that a few thousand years prior to the events of the books, the Andals arrived in Westeros, and started cutting down more weirwoods, so that again, Westeros is now facing a second wave of vengeful others. But personally, I think that the motivations of the others go much farther beyond simple revenge. I think that philosophically, the others are diametrically opposed to just about everything that it means to be human. The others have tasted the bliss and serenity of the weirwoods firsthand. They know what group consciousness can be like. But they have also gotten to witness what being human is like, the greed and competition, the wars, torture, exploitation. We've only been reading a few years' worth of events within the world of Ice and Fire, and we've all gotten to see it for ourselves. It's cold, brutal, and uncaring in there. And the souls in the weirwoods have been witnessing it all for thousands of years. So I don't think that the others are just intent on exacting revenge. I think they are fighting a war of annihilation. They want to cleanse Westeros of the scourge of humanity so that they can establish a new status quo on the ideals of peace and harmony that they experienced in the weirwoods. Who knows? Maybe once the land has a chance to heal, they can all eventually rejoin the weirwood net again. But I do think there is one more shorter-term motivation that the others have as well. I've spent considerable time throughout this theory series discussing various hominid species in the world of Ice and Fire, as well as genetically related subplots presented in the current A Song of Ice and Fire books. And this is not without good reason. Genetics plays a major role in a lot of George R. R. Martin's writing, and I think it is playing a very prominent role in this story as well. Way back in the first video of this series, I pointed out that it would be worth watching Preston Jacobs' Genetics of Dragons series, and just in case you missed it, I'll drop another link to it in the description below. In the series, he lays out the idea that dragon riding and dragon hatching of the Targaryens are ultimately explained by Mendelian genetics and are directly linked to the X chromosomes of Targaryens. Essentially, Targaryen males and females with one Dragon X gene are able to ride dragons, and Targaryen females with two Dragon X genes can be dragon hatchers. I honestly don't know if it's Preston's own theory, or whether he is just the one who took the idea and invested enough time into making it a video series. But once you see the series in its entirety, it's pretty convincing. Except for one thing. Preston never explains in the video why dragon hatching or dragon riding is tied to the X chromosome. Why not the Y chromosome? Or why not either? I had personally chalked it up to George R. R. Martin's feminist leanings, and if I'm honest, I still do think that this is an influencing factor along with what I'm about to say here. But then I ran into a biological rule called Haldane's rule, first theorized in the 1920s by a biologist by the name of, you guessed it, Haldane. The rule states that if there is a hybrid species where one sex is sterile, that sex will be the heterogametic sex. And to break that down into simpler terms, heterogametic means the sex that has different chromosomes. In humans, this means males, who have both X and Y chromosomes. In the past 100 years, there have been many examples of this being true. For example, ligers, which are a cross between lions and tigers that I referenced earlier in this series, follow Haldane's rule. Male ligers are sterile, while female ligers can produce offspring. It's generally thought that Haldane's rule is true because males have only one X chromosome to rely on, so any incompatibilities linked to the X chromosome will result in a sterile individual. While females have two X chromosomes to rely on, so in the case of females, only incompatibilities with the dominant X chromosome will result in sterility. And at this point, you're probably saying, wait, you're telling me that the Targaryens are hybrids? To which I say, yes. Yes, I'm saying that. Targaryens are not just ordinary humans. If they were, then any ordinary human could ride dragons. And we know that this is not the case. Targaryens, and most likely all Valyrians, are or were hybrids of humans and some other similar hominid species. Whether organic or engineered, we may never know. And Haldane's rule would explain not only why the dragon gene is passed through the X chromosome, but also why Targaryen inbreeding has resulted in multiple instances of sterility. And it goes bigger than that. It also explains why other houses who appear to be inbreeding, such as the Wents and possibly the Danes who I mentioned in part 3, also seem to be having fertility problems. I think it also explains why King Rickard Stark married the Marsh King's daughter, rather than, say, marrying his daughter to a Marsh prince. Or it might also explain why the story of the Night's King is the story of a human male breeding with a female other, rather than the other way around. Or why Rhaegar Targaryen was interested in Lyanna Stark, rather than Targaryen females being interested in Stark males. There are people in the world of Ice and Fire who have long figured out that if you want to capture genetic abilities for your bloodline, then what you need are females. And the reason I've been having this whole discussion in the first place is because of this. If the others are hominids and have their own genetic makeup, then they are also in the genetic arms race that has been going on in Westeros. They've had access to the blood of the first men for thousands of years, so they don't really need any more of that. Likewise, they've had access to the blood of the children and giants for thousands of years as well. They've probably even been able to get Andal blood at some point over the past few thousand years. But the one thing they haven't gotten yet is dragon blood. And if they intend to rid Westeros of humans, having dragon blood may very well prove to be the linchpin of their plan, since dragonfire obviously poses a massive threat to creatures made of ice. As of the time of the books, Dany is the only known dragon hatcher remaining, which makes her a huge target for anyone playing the genetic Game of Thrones. But then we have Jon Snow, who has the blood of the first men, the children of the forest, the others, and the Targaryens flowing in his veins. A melting pot of all the best genetics that Westeros has to offer, and he's already been north of the Wall. Now you might argue, sure, maybe Jon does have this super potent lineage, but to everyone in the north, or even north of the Wall, he's just Ned Stark's bastard. Why would anyone care about him? And that's a valid point to make. Obviously, Ned knew the truth of who Jon is, but Ned is now dead, and from what we can tell, he took his secret to the grave. Lyanna knew, of course, but she is dead too. Arthur Dayne, Oswell Went, and Gerald Hightower all knew, but they're also all dead. But Howland Reed knows. And if you recall my analysis of Howland Reed in Part 5, I think it's safe to say that if Howland Reed knows, then the Three-Eyed Crow knows. The children know, and the Weirwoods know. And if they all know, then I'm betting the others have found out as well. So keep this all in mind, because now having discussed the plots, the themes, and the setting of A Song of Ice and Fire, we're finally going to start on my theories of how the story will end, what the show got wrong, and also what the show might have gotten right. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.